Okay, so today we're discussing how Istio is going to work with cells and how those two different epics or stream of works are going to kind of affect one another. Jarv, you have most of the agenda, so do you want to start? Your
Yeah,
first
sure. And I
item?
think, yeah, that sounds good. So the first item that I put at the top here is that I'm hearing that there might be some pressure to like just to pause the Istio work altogether. Is it really necessary? Is it necessary for cells? Does it align with our priorities? Um, I'm pushing back and kind of saying that I think it's extremely important to continue the work if we have any desire to get rid of HA proxy. Like, I don't see an alternative. At the same time, I don't see Istio being really a strict requirement for dedicated or cells. Like, I think we probably can, we probably don't need HA proxy for cells or dedicated. And I guess I'm curious what you two think about that. If you think I'm correct in this, and if there's anything you'd like to add.
So first of all, well, let me address the pause to the project. Yes, that is true. I was asked to stop working on this project and give priority to Cloudflare and the WAF implementation towards dedicated. And so, but I wasn't asked to like fully stop in a way that if I have free time, which I might or might not, I can still like engage with this project. It is really sad for me because in the last 2 weeks I made a lot of progress and I actually have a POC working on Pre where I am able to route API and web traffic through GKE Gateway into Istio and then Istio to the applications. And I was hoping to continue that work and do a full implementation of all the endpoints, all the front-end endpoints, for Pre, and then move to set up the multi-cluster setup in GStaging. But I don't know when I'm gonna get to that, if because it's depending on the priorities from leadership. I do feel like this solution could potentially replace HA proxy and make everything cloud native. There is different layers of routing that I feel like cells is gonna need, and one of them is what Steve is working on, which is in Cloudflare and doing that first routing towards the cells. But we're still gonna need some sort of like better routing mechanism in cluster so we can do like better deployments and have multiple versions of the application do like some sort of canary in cluster in an easier way than what we do right now. That is honestly one of the primary reasons for why we use HA proxy right now. Is to be able to have that separation using headers and the different workloads.
Can you repeat that? Is that for Canary or between zones? What separation are you talking about?
So
Sorry, I
right now in
didn't
the
get like-
GitLab.com, HA proxy, what it's primarily doing is, first of all, analyzes the headers and see if it's a canary traffic or not, and then uses like regex or path routing for sending it to the different workloads, meaning like API, Git, HTTPS, or registry packages, that type of things. And then if none of that matches, it sends everything to web, right? You can replace that logic in Istio with virtual services and destination rules. Meaning that you don't need HA proxy to do that. When you're implementing like the mix of GKE Gateway plus Istio Gateway, what you're doing is some sort of separation, and instead of exposing the Istio gateways with the public IP address, you're only exposing one IP address on the GKE gateway, and then you route the traffic to Istio. gateways. That way you have some protection in front of Istio gateways. You could implement like also Anycast IP, so you can have like an IP address that is closer to your customers. You can do some like SSL policies, all that at the GKE gateway level, and also TLS termination there. And then you can encrypt the traffic between that and the Istio gateways. And then on the Istio gateways, you could do more complex in-cluster routing. Like, for instance, let's say I have web version 1, and then Scarbeck and Delivery are putting, web version 2, right? You could do that easily with a destination rule and a virtual service configuration in Istio, where you can send like, I don't know, 10% of the traffic to the version 2 of web. That is not a capability that we have right now with HA proxy. It would mean like, some reconfiguration there. And it's not something that you could do with like in a Kubernetes way. Like we would manage Istio, well, right now with GitLab files. But we will open the possibility for delivery to actually do those routing definitions and not us. We'll manage Istio application, we'll manage the GKE gateway, but they control the routing. And that would open a world of possibilities for them integrating with like Flagler, like some other stuff. So the way I see it, like your logic at the edge with the headers or the cookies for a cell, they don't negate the need for this complex routing mechanism in cluster, because you still need these capabilities even if it's in a cell. I mean, I'm not fully onboarded on dedicated yet. I don't know how they handle like deployments, how they handle replacing the applications. So my knowledge is still very limited on that. I just started watching the videos. So I would rely on you all, like I know you have more information on how the future of that's gonna look like, so we can discuss of how would like having something like Istio and GKE Gateway would like help.
Okay, so I want to try and answer Jarv's question first, regarding posing to work or not posing to work, or replacing AJ proxy. I think posing to work, not posing to work for Istio, and replacing AJ proxy are two different things, and I feel like we can kind of replace AJ proxy at least bit by bit, piecemeal, part of cells and part of the WEF OKR as well, right? So for example, asset routing is some work that HA proxy does, right? So asset routing for cells has to change completely. So we extract assets routing from HA proxy to either Cloudflare workers or whatever technology we decide. And that's one piece of HA proxy removed. The WEF stuff, that is for WEF on GitLab dedicated, but we can build it. So the rate limits that we have on HA proxy get moved to Cloudflare. That's also another big chunk of HA proxy removed, usage at least. And then what would be left is Canary and multi-cluster. So then we have to decide, is Canary, let's say, can we live with Canary for another year? And then when we deploy cell, the QA cell, and have cell one with customers running, can we get rid of the Canary stage and don't use Canary anymore, and remove another piece of HA proxy? And then for multi-cluster, I think that's a bigger discussion and a bigger thing that we need to decide, in the sense, Jarv already opened up an issue and we have it in the agenda later on. Do we go with a multi-cluster setup on our current existing GitLab.com database, GitLab.com deployment, or do we shrink it down to one Kubernetes cluster, for example? And with GitLab dedicated cells, we're also combining the API web and Git fleet into a single web service fleet, because that's how GitLab dedicated works, right? So also that removes the need for HA proxy. So I think removing HA proxy is kind of something that's going to happen, and something that's going to happen in the long run. Now, if we want to put in Istio for all the benefits that you mentioned, Marcel, that's probably, as you already know, a project on its own, and it's something that is needed, but is it more needed than cells? I'm not the one to answer that. Now, delivery, like you mentioned, delivery will be a big user of Istio, right? And as far as I understand it from the history perspective, as delivery are the people who pushed for Istio the most because of the blue-green deployment, OKR they have, and things like that. But with cells, they're going to move into a completely different deployment mechanism. So that big part feature of Istio, they're no longer going to use at all. It's no longer in their idea, because we went into a ring deployment model for cells. And I'm not saying Istio is not usable. I feel like it is usable, and it has some benefits on top of Nginx and the GKE gateway and so on and so forth. So I don't want to seem like I'm advocating against it. I'm just trying to make it clear. Maybe it's something that we can not par, but maybe we don't need it as much as we needed it before, simply because we have different priorities and we have a different vision now of the infrastructure, how it's going to look like. Does that make sense? Because with the vision we had like 6 months ago, where we were still not going to deploy cells in 2 years' time, then yeah, it still made 100% sense that we need to go for it. But now maybe we don't. It doesn't make sense that much anymore, or at least it's not the highest priority anymore. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you can go deeper into like the deployment mechanism and the vision for cells and how is that gonna
Sure.
happen?
So
Since I'm
maybe
very aware of that.
okay. So let me. So are you familiar with ring deployments?
Yes.
Okay, so we're following the same mechanism for cells. So we're gonna have multiple rings, right? So far we only got to ring 3, but that's just a detail. But ring 0 is where we're gonna have our canary stage existing one right now. And we're gonna have a cell where its role is gonna be a QA cell, where only private projects for us get created. We run QA and so on and so forth. That's ring 0. So delivery wakes up in the morning, deploys the new package here, everything looks good, and then they're deploying it to the main stage as they do it today, right? And then in the future, when cell 1, cell 2, and cell 3 gets created, then we're going to have some process that promotes them to 1, 2, 3, and okay, now we're confident that everything is working, so we're going to promote it into a bigger batch. So it is more going batch style process, similar to how GKE does node pool configuration, right? Let's say we are changing the node type in GKE. GKE first start by changing one node in the node pool, and then 2, and then 4, 8, and so on and so forth. So it's like a batch rollout process, and it's very similar. It's very similar to this process, basically, just a different name.
So question, is a cell considered like a completely segregated GK cluster with deployments, or is a cell just a deployment within a cluster?
It's going to be a completely different. I'm trying to find my merge request. It's not fully defined yet, but it is going to be like, I'm of the opinion it's going to be a different GKE cluster. So if we open up the architecture documentation, and there's something that the rest of your team is going to be working on next quarter. So you have the foundation team has 2 OKRs, right? One for WAF, and the other one is to onboard more people on dedicated and define an architecture for cells, right? So I already start working on that stuff. And there are going to be separate GCP projects as well, and separate GKE clusters separately per cell. And then there's going to be some ingress. I didn't specify the ingress here. It can be Nginx, it can be Istio, it can be whatever, even an ingress written in Bash, whatever, I don't care. The routing service will send the request to that ingress. So for cells, we're going to have a single GKE cluster with web service, GitLab shell, registry, and so on and so forth. So it's going to be a shrink down deployment of what we have on gitlab.com and removing some separation we have, like the zonal clusters and regional clusters and AJ proxy and so on and so forth.
So when you're
Does that
doing a
make sense?
deployment, like, and you go and replace, let's say you're acting on cell 2. So you're gonna do a rollout of web service, like side to side, like you're gonna do a rolling deployment on each of those. And that's why you're saying that, for instance, like something like Canary or a blue-green is not necessary because you had like the QA cell test.
Exactly,
like-
exactly. So it's replacing the, like, both solutions are good. Like the blue-green deployment and the Canary solution works and works well for when we have like a monolithic deployment like this. But for cells, we get the Canary and we get the blue-green deployment kind of through cells, because like we have two cells where we can deploy the code, test that works well, so let me deploy it to the next cell and we go from there. Does that make sense?
Okay, yeah, that makes total sense. And as for the ingress, you're describing Nginx as far as I know, the only thing that uses Nginx right now is the API.
Correct, yeah.
So
That's for .com. For .com.
For .com, yes, for .com. Is the Nginx ingress enabled for like the monolithic web service deployment in this type of architecture?
As far as I understand it, yes. It uses like the official hand chart ingress thing.
Okay, and what's the capability as far as you know that the Nginx ingress provide versus just a regular Kubernetes ingress?
No idea. I think that's more up distributions wheelhouse, because like we're just a consumer of their hand chart as far as I understand it, and their hand chart supports Nginx. We could say let's move to the GKE ingress, but that really depends if the hand chart supports it, if Get supports it, and if dedicated
Yeah.
supported.
Because I
mean,
remember there was an effort, right, to remove it, and something happened.
It was because of the API polling
That's right.
from GitLab Runner, right, Jarv?
Yes. What's the relation, like going back to the agenda, just like maybe we should just go through the items because I have a meeting right after this.
Yeah.
But so number 2, what is the relationship between cell and Kubernetes cluster? Like, are we going to have one? You said everything's in one cluster, which makes sense. Is that for a cell? Like, in other words, is there a mapping there? Can I have more than one Kubernetes cluster in a given cell? Or is it always going to be one? Or can multiple cells share the same Kubernetes cluster?
I'm of the opinion no. One cell equals one Kubernetes cluster.
Okay.
And that's because it gives us the benefit of your issue you opened in point number 8, right? Like Pierre left a comment there, like it's still beneficial to have multiple clusters because we can roll out changes safer and things like that. And like one of the biggest benefit of cells from a reliability perspective is we can roll out a change and we can roll it out in batches and validate that everything works as expected, right? and if we have a GKE cluster per cell, then we get that benefit as well. Where if we have one GKE cluster for all the cells or like 20 cells, then we lose that benefit. Now, an argument could be made from an efficiency and cost perspective
Yeah.
that we could impact, but I think I'd rather not optimize for cost at first, simply because we don't know how things are going to work just yet. So maybe keeping it simple for now and not muck around cost efficiency. I don't know.
I kind of think that I think we need, I mean, one thing we could find out, I assume right now, is like, is there a possibility that a single ultimate customer would want to be in their own cell? And if the answer to that is yes, I think we need to make sure people understand that if putting like one Kubernetes cluster per cell, that means a single customer gets a whole Kubernetes cluster and all the costs associated with that. And whether that meets our goals, or we punt that down the road and we say like, okay, that's going to be the limitation for now, but maybe
Yeah, so
later on, right?
So Rachel opened up an issue for let me try and find it here. She opened up an issue about cell sizing. Now, her proposal at the moment is we start with the smallest cell size, simply because one, we don't have a lot of customers who are willing to go into cells. Like, quite realistically, we have none so far. So we're probably gonna go with the smallest reference architecture, which is the 3K reference architecture, and then maybe upscale it or create new cells with bigger sizes in the future. So yeah, we need to look our biggest SaaS customer, do they fit in that one cell or not? And things like that. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking, the possibility of quickly having, if ultimate customers want to be in their own cell, which I think is something that's probably going to come to us as a request, then we could be looking at many, many cells.
I think if like, from what I know, at least from the discussions I had with you, like Jorg and things like that, is like, if a customer wants their own dedicated cell, then they're more of a customer for dedicated rather than GitLab.com. With SaaS, you have to accept that you're in a multi-tenant environment. If you want a single tenant environment, then you have to go with dedicated and pay the extra price of dedicated. So I think that's something we need to continue pushing on as an infrastructure team. Like, if they want a dedicated cell, then like GitLab.com is not for them. It's GitLab dedicated is the correct product for them. And that's why we have these two products, right? Like, that are blurring the lines quite a lot for us. So we need to have some hard line there. That's my opinion, at least.
So why is each cell on their individual like GCP project? It's gonna like complicate things a lot as for route.
That's up to discussion. The reason I did that is for isolation reasons. Like, again, just if we do a configuration change from a project level thing, we do it on one project, see how it goes, and then roll it out. It's like building on that model, but it's not set in stone. Like, we can decide if we don't want it and we want a single project, for example.
Yeah. As for the multi-cluster versus single cluster, I mean, having a single cluster reduces complexity a lot, but in the case of a failed like GKE upgrade, I would see that being problematic, and I would affect anybody that is in that cell. And a cluster upgrade can fail even if it worked in the other GKE cluster. So something to keep in mind.
Yeah, but is a GKE cluster upgrade failure like detrimental to our customers? Like, would they start seeing errors?
They might.
Or
I mean,
would it
I haven't
just be
seen one failing in a long time, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It depends of how I would react to like an upgrade that is not moving along.
Yeah, I guess it also depends on the complexity we want to entail, right? Because multi-cluster brings a lot of
A lot
complexity.
of complexity.
So maybe it's something like that's why we have like, as bad as this sound, that's why we have an error budget, right? Like to do these kind of issues, like to save ourselves from these kind of issues. I'm not saying we're always hitting that our error budget, but like it's there for a reason to burn it through sometimes because issues like these happen, like failures happen all the time. So, yeah, it's a matter of managing risk, I think.
Okay, I only have a few minutes left. So number 3 was just a random thought, like being able to directly address cells via hosting. I don't think it's something that we need to discuss now. Was just a curiosity. But I'm very like number 4. I think I can skip. I don't think that's relevant anymore. Number 5 is something that I'm definitely thinking about a lot as it pertains to ultimate customers. As you guys know, that like we often just blanket whitelist ultimate customers, both at the application and at the edge. And I haven't seen it brought up yet. Maybe this is something we should bring up in the blueprint as something to consider. Kind of like falls, it's similar to feature flags, right? Like, do we want to have application rate limits that are different per cell? And do we want to have edge rate limits that are different per cell at Cloudflare?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the mapping. Where is the mapping of the customer to which cell happens? I would say the logic is being implemented, I think, on Cloudflare as of right now. So I would expect the rate limit to be there. I don't
Yeah,
think it,
yeah.
yeah.
But Cloudflare isn't session aware, right? So it's not going to have, you're not going to be able to rate limit per user to Cloudflare. You can rate limit per path maybe, but yeah, so I think that's something, and maybe even like a first order feature, like, I don't know, like, or we don't worry about it for now and we'll probably just allow list everybody on a cell. I'm curious also as it relates to HA proxy for number 6, like right now we secure the connection between HA proxy and Cloudflare by using certificates. And this is something I haven't really looked into for ingress. If we're connecting directly from Cloudflare to a cluster ingress, if that connection will be secure at all and whether someone would be able to bypass it.
So Cloudflare workers have MTLS available if we want to. So
Okay.
if there's an endpoint, we can say, hey, Cloudflare, create a certificate for us, and the worker will work on MTLS connection and can only authenticate if it presents a certificate if it wants to. Like the idea, at least for
Yeah.
the router, is to be on a zero trust architecture where the GitLab instance itself is public, but only it can access it because it provides the correct certificates and things like that.
Yeah, so I guess we can configure Nginx for MTLS, but I have no idea if our chart supports that, but maybe it does.
Who knows?
Yeah, who knows?
I think MTLS is like, as far as I understood it, it's just a matter for them to provide the certificate.
Yeah.
And like that, like Nginx should be able to provide certificates. I mean, its whole point
Yeah.
is to provide certificates. So, yeah, should
Okay.
work at least.
I'm out of time. I need to run. I don't know, like whether did you guys kind of get through everything that you wanted to talk about in this meeting? If so, I think we're good. If you want to, we could also schedule a follow-up if you feel there's more to flesh out here.
I did. I don't know if Marcel did.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. And this is something that we can revisit later on, once cells are like more defined, I guess. But Yeah, I mean, I still see the value of having some sort of like, service mesh or like even a better ingress than Nginx. Especially if we're gonna do multi-cluster, all this comes to play again, even for cells.
Okay.
But
Yep.
as of right
That's-
now, I'm good. Thank you.
Have a nice day. Bye.
Bye. You too.